Welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 Early Access Guide video. Today we're discussing the Cleric class. If you're new here, I release weekly videos on Baldur's Gate 3, so if you like guides, news, and commentary, then consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss anything. Let's get started. Clerics are a full spellcasting class who use Wisdom as their spellcasting ability. Because of this, Wisdom will be your primary ability score. That said, as of now in Early Access, the Cleric doesn't have a great, consistent way to deal damage outside of spellcasting, and because we only go to level 4, we have a fairly limited number of spell slots that we're going to need to use for kind of healing and buffing the party, which means that we're going to be relying on weapon attacks to deal damage a lot of the time. And there are two main ways to build your Cleric right now. You're going to need to choose if you want to be Strength or Dexterity based. Both are very viable options. Strength Cleric is a better fit if you're wanting to be in melee and be a bit more tanky, whereas the Dexterity Cleric is going to be running a bow and staying at range. So first, let's discuss some race options. For the strength-based cleric, I would recommend the Gold Dwarf. This will give you a +2 to Constitution and a +1 to Wisdom. They gain Dwarven Resilience, granting advantage on saving throws versus poison, and they also gain resistance to poison damage. They gain proficiency in the Battle Axe, Hand Axe, Light Hammer, and Warhammer, which is actually really important and kind of one of the main reasons that I do recommend going Dwarf for your strength-based cleric. The current cleric subclasses don't offer martial weapon proficiency, so without this, you are going to be limited to simple weapons. They also receive Dark Vision and Dwarven Toughness, which increases their hit points. Dexterity-based clerics should definitely go Wood Elf. Wood Elves give a +2 to Dexterity and a +1 to Wisdom. They have proficiency in Perception, advantage against charm effects, and immunity to sleep magic. Plus, they have Dark Vision. They gain proficiency in Longsword, Short Sword, Longbow, and Short Bow, which again is important as you're otherwise going to be limited to simple weapons. They gain Fleet of Foot and Mask of the Wild, granting additional movement speed and proficiency in Stealth. So when you create your cleric, you're going to choose a divine domain and the deity who your cleric serves. Each domain grants a unique channel divinity feature as well as some domain spells. Channel divinity is a skill that you can use once per rest, and your domain spells are spells that are always prepared and don't count against your number of prepared spells for the day. In addition to your domain spells, your cleric can prepare a number of spells equal to their cleric level plus their wisdom modifier. So if you start with, say, a 16 in wisdom, you're going to begin with 4 spells prepared. Now, you can change your prepared spells at any time by selecting them under the skill tab. So for this reason, I'm not going to go super in-depth on all of the spell choices because you're actually going to be able to change them out and test each one to see what works best for your build and play style. That said, I am going to give some tips and a few recommendations. So first off, you are going to want to grab at least one healing spell, and for this, I do recommend Healing Word. While it is a pretty small heal, I still prefer it over Cure Wounds for a couple of reasons. First is that it can be cast from range as a bonus action, meaning that you can still take your regular attack action and then pick up a downed ally from range. Cure Wounds takes your full action and you have to be within touch range of the target. And so for some fights, the party is going to be pretty spread out, and this could actually be a big nuisance. Next, you'll want to take something to deal some damage. Guiding Bolt and Inflict Wounds are the two options here. Inflict Wounds can deal slightly more damage, but it does require you to be in melee, while Guiding Bolt can be cast from range, and it gives advantage on the next attack against the target. And lastly, any good cleric will be running some buffs and debuffs. A solid choice here is Bless, which will bolster the attacks and saving throws of your allies, a huge buff in the early game. I also really love the spell Bane. When it lands, it gives enemy creatures a d4 penalty to attacks and saving throws, which can be a huge help to the magic casters in your party. The key part, though, is being that when it lands, enemies do get a chance to save against this effect, and honestly, nothing is more frustrating at low level than spending one of your 2 spell slots to have the enemy pass the saving throw. So for this reason, Bless is the safer option. Now, clerics do begin with 3 cantrips, and for this, I would recommend taking Sacred Flame and Guidance, and for your third, probably Thaumaturgy or Light. Note that light domain clerics do gain the Light cantrip as part of their subclass feature, so they can opt for something else here. Next, let's look at subclass options. Currently, there are 3 to choose from. There is the Life Domain. Life Domain clerics gain proficiency in heavy armor. Starting from level 1, their healing spells restore additional hit points equal to 2 plus the spell level. At second level, they'll gain the Channel Divinity feature Preserve Life, which lets them channel divinity to heal all allies within 30 feet. This is really a solid ability and currently the only AoE heal that can be cast during combat. Their first level domain spells are Bless and Cure Wounds, and then at third level they'll gain Aid and Lesser Restoration. All of these spells are already in the Cleric spell list, so you aren't really gaining access to anything new with this subclass. But they are all pretty solid and they're nice to have around, and they kind of free you up to prepare different spells from the Cleric spell list. Next is the Light Domain Cleric. Light Domain Clerics gain a bonus cantrip Light, as I mentioned. They gain the feature Warding Flare, which lets them, as a reaction, impose disadvantage on enemies attacking them. At second level, they'll gain the Channel Divinity feature Radiance of the Dawn, which lets them dispel magical darkness and deal radiant damage to all enemies within 30 feet. The first level domain spells are Burning Hands and Fairy Fire. Both are very solid spells and aren't normally available to clerics. The domain spells granted at level 3 are Scorching Ray and Darkness. Trickery Domain Clerics gain Blessing of the Trickster, which lets them give an ally advantage on stealth checks. They gain the Channel Divinity feature Invoke Duplicity, which lets them summon an illusion that grants advantage on attacks when both the attacker and the illusion are within 3 meters of the target. Note that this ability does require concentration, so you can't use it in conjunction with, say, Bless or Bane or some of those other concentration spells available to the Cleric. The domain spells from first level are Charm Person and Disguise Self, which honestly aren't bad spells, but they also aren't super great. I haven't found a ton of use for either of these. The domain spells that they gain at third level are Mirror Image, which I personally really love this spell. It's very powerful and it greatly increases the survivability of your cleric. And then they also gain Pass Without Trace, which I haven't found a ton of use for this spell, but I wouldn't totally write it off because I do think that it could be useful given the right situation. Next, let's look at skills and background. I like to prioritize wisdom-based skills followed by dexterity or strength depending on the build you're going for. Charisma is mainly a dump stat for clerics, but until group roles are implemented, you may find it worthwhile to put a few points into charisma and pick up something like persuasion to help with navigating conversations. From the class options, I like to take Insight and Medicine. If you went Wood Elf, Folk Hero is a pretty good option as it will allow you to have proficiency in every wisdom-based skill. Strength-based Dwarven Clerics might consider the Sailor background if you want to pick up that proficiency in Perception. So next up is ability scores, and this is one class where I do not advise to use the recommended ability scores. So we've already established that Wisdom is the primary ability for a cleric, so I would take this all the way up to 16. Constitution contributes to your hit points and increases your ability to maintain concentration on spells. As we mentioned, clerics do have some pretty powerful concentration spells, so you probably want at least a 14 here. And if you roll Dwarf, then you can actually get this up to 16 if you want. Dexterity contributes to your armor class when wearing medium armor, and for dexterity-based clerics will also contribute to their hit chance and damage, so they're going to want to get a 16 here. In the full version of the game, this may become a dump stat for strength-based life clerics because they do have proficiency in heavy armor, but as of now, there aren't many heavy armor options, so until more are added, you might be better off sticking to medium armor, and for that reason, I would not advise dumping here. At the minimum, I would get at least a 10 so that you aren't taking a negative modifier to your armor class, and if you can get this up to 14, it'll give you the maximum of +2 AC for medium armor. Strength will improve the hit chance and damage of strength-based clerics, so they'll want to get this to 14, while dexterity clerics can dump here. Intelligence is pretty much a dump stat. You can bring a wizard along for the intelligence checks, or you can pick up the headband of intellect. And like I mentioned, for charisma, it will likely be a dump stat once group roles are added, but until then, you may want to put a few points here. That's really just personal preference. And this is where I would normally discuss leveling up, but honestly, there isn't much to cover for leveling up since you do choose your subclass at character creation. I've already mentioned the level 2 features. You gain those automatically. Also, as you level, you're going to gain more spell slots and be able to prepare more spells. Once you reach third level, you are going to gain second level spells. You won't really have any decisions to make until level 4 when you choose between your ability score increase or a feat. And I do recommend personally to take the ability score increase and get your wisdom up to 18. And so with all of that, we can actually just move right on to gear and combat. So my general approach to combat with the cleric class is to get a buff like Bless or Bane out early in the fight, and then just to focus on damage. I don't really use my healing spells that often on allies unless they're downed, at which point I'll toss out a healing word to kind of get them back in the fight. You don't have a ton of spell slots and the healing isn't super powerful, so you aren't going to be, casting tons of healing spells and kind of keeping everyone at full health. Instead, you're going to want to be a bit more strategic with things like placement of the party and debuffing enemies to avoid taking damage in the first place. Also, make sure that you're making use of healing potions and food, which can be consumed as a bonus action to restore HP. For strength-based clerics, you can run a one-handed weapon and a shield on your main bar. Your first upgrade will be very early. You can pick up a warhammer almost immediately from the Shattered Sanctum. This can be wielded one-handed with a shield for 1d8 or two-handed on your second loadout for 1d10. If you invested some points into dexterity, then you can take Lysel's half plate, or you could pick up a +1 scale mail, and if you dumped dexterity, then you'll need to keep an eye out for heavy armor. So clerics do begin the game with a shield and I believe a mace, so dexterity-based clerics will want to find a ranged weapon as soon as possible and then eventually upgrade to a +1 longbow. For your second loadout, you can keep the shield, but you'll want to swap that mace out for a finesse weapon for those times that you do find yourself stuck in melee or needing to sustain some enemy attacks. And that sums up what you need to get started with the cleric class. If you found this video useful, please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more Baldur's Gate 3 guides and tips. If you still have not joined my community Discord, I will leave a link down in the description. This is a great place to ask questions and discuss the game, and I'll see you in the next one.